Not many people actually understand how the UCAT scoring works. Every year on Reddit, I see the same 4 questions floating around. How many papers are there? If I'm sitting on a certain day, is everybody sitting that same paper? If I do well and people in the room do well as well, does that affect my score? And finally, am I at a disadvantage by sitting the exam later in the window? So these are lots of myths floating around. And when we did the research for our new UCatalyst method, we discovered the truth to all of these. So I'm going to bust all 4 myths for you now. Myth number 1 is that there are only a few tests floating around that you might sit. Now, a really important source document from the official UCAT that I'm going to refer to time and time again that will tell you the truth behind all of these myths is something called the Pearson Vue Technical Report that they did 2 years ago in 2024. So if you go to page 45 of that document, you'll see that UCAT make 5 tests, and you will get randomly allocated one of those at the time of sitting. And in 2024, it said that those 5 tests each had between 7,000 and 8,000 people where that test was allocated to them, which shows that it was pretty evenly distributed across all test takers. The second myth is that the same day sitters all take the same day test. So let's say you've got your UCAT on the 17th of July, that everybody will get Form 4, for example. And the idea behind this is that if you know, for example, somebody that might be sitting the test in the morning of that day, if you ask them what questions came up, then maybe you can gain an advantage when you go to sit it if you're doing it that afternoon. Now, of course, UCAT need to protect against leaks. So whilst they don't say anything explicitly in the report or on their website, here's really what we can deduce. UCAT doesn't publish exactly how forms are assigned to candidates, so this isn't fully nailed down, but Pearson Vue, who deliver the test, typically use per candidate randomization on their high-stakes computer-based exams, because session-level form sharing would create an obvious leakage risk. So it is a high-stakes exam, and although it's unconfirmed, most likely Pearson Vue do the exact same for the UCAT, which means that it is randomized per candidate. So if you combine points 1 and points 2, you have one of 5 exams that you could possibly get with all the number of questions that you get within the exam as well, and you don't really know if you're going to get the same one as the person next to you or who sat it before you. There's basically no point in trying to cheat. You're much better off putting your energy into actually doing well in the exam. And if you want some help with putting the right sort of energy and preparation into the exam, we've just developed a brand new UCatalyst method, which is part of the predictable offer protocol, which has a 93% success rate of getting students into at least one of their chosen universities, which you can check out by going to the Future website. Myth number 3 is that your raw score is graded on a curve compared to what that day's cohort did. In other words, how well you do depends on how well other people did on the day. Now, that is a myth, and I'll show you again from that form why that is not true. If you go to page 48 of UCAT's technical report, the UCAT uses something called item response theory. It means every question on the test has a difficulty score that's been set in advance before any candidate sits down. Your scaled score is calculated against those preset difficulties, not against the people in the room with you, not against today's cohort. So the maths is done before you even walk in. So let's say, for example, if you wanted to get a 700 and Form 2 had many more difficult questions than Form 4, then you'd actually have to get less correct on Form 2, which has the more difficult questions, to get that 700 score. And also it means that if you felt that your exam was particularly hard, don't worry, because they've made allowances for that. And the fourth and final myth is that sitting the exam later somehow disadvantages you because the scaling shifts. Well, if we go back to that document again, particularly now to page 55, there's a direct quote by UCAT that says UCAT scores are anchored back to a common benchmark comparable across windows. The reason that's not true and it doesn't change is the same item response theory that I talked about in the previous point, is that they have already allocated this question is this level of difficulty. So if someone gets it right, they get this point compared to this one, which is less difficult, so they get fewer points, and so on throughout the entire cycle of the UCAT. So for the whole exam window from mid-July to end of September. So a 700 score is achieved the exact same way, whether it's mid-July or late September. There's no early bird advantage for doing it in July, and there's no latecomer penalty for doing it in late September. There are some reasons where this myth comes from though, and it's down to 2 things really. The first is that the deciles are calculated at the end. And of course, that's because they need to understand where everybody is and then rank them into tenths so that they could allocate those deciles and those thresholds. What tends to happen is around mid to the second half of September is that you'll get the UCAT interim report, which is basically telling you for the first half of test takers how they have done so far, so that you can get a gauge when you're submitting your application as to where you think you'll roughly land in the UCAT scorers so that it can help guide where you apply. Now, what tends to happen is they give you an interim one so that you can understand early before, so that you can submit your application early. But then when the UCAT window closes at the end of September, a few days later, within about a week, they will release the final report that tells you the actual finalized deciles and what the average scores are. What always happens is the interim averages and deciles are always slightly higher than what ends up being the final score. The reason for that being is not because anything to do with how the test is calculated or anything like that. It's just simply that the people who don't do well in the UCAT will delay and delay their test date. They'll keep postponing it. And eventually it means that a lot of poor performers tend to be towards the end of September or in September, right? It doesn't mean, it's not the same as saying, if I perform in September, I will do badly. It's just that of the people that do badly, a lot of them tend to perform in September. So sitting earlier doesn't get you an easier paper, and waiting to see how others do has no advantage to you. Pick the right dates based on this video that I've created here. Otherwise, go to the Future website to understand our UCatalyst method, which is a 6-step process to help you get your best score and prepare in the best way possible. Thanks for watching and best of luck with your UCAT.